Each episode, we bring you B2B leaders to learn about their successes, fails, and what's working for them in the market. If you enjoy the show, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify and share this podcast with a friend. That's enough from me. Let's dive right in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. I'm Shahin Hoda with X-Growth, and today I'm talking to Marcella Larsen, Senior Director, Retail Advisor at Salesforce, about what are some of the recent developments in the retail sector and what should you know if you are selling into this space? On that note, let's dive in. Marcella, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you. Excited to be here today, Shahin.
Yeah, super excited, Marcella. I mean, retail is one of the big sectors, especially down here in Australia. It's right up there with some of the other industries and verticals that are a regular focus and target for a lot of businesses. And it's a big sector here in Australia. So I'm really excited to talk about that. Obviously, retail has gone through massive changes. Starting from the toilet paper crisis all the way to today where there are a lot of changes that are happening there. But can you give me a quick overview of, from your perspective, what did retail go through in the past 2 years?
Well, the past 2 years, and you've probably heard this term, no doubt, retail went through a true acceleration. So some of the more forward-thinking retailers were able to accelerate and double down on their investments to be resilient and deal with a black swan event. Others had to think very differently, had to form partnerships and push themselves further. And that pace is just going to continue. So I think we saw an acceleration to deal with the challenges and to better understand where the customer was going next and deal with the adversity we were all facing. So that's sort of set a new bar for all of us and all of our expectations and how we shop. And our behaviors have changed and retail has had to adapt.
So tell me about that, right? Let's dig a little bit deeper in there. What has been some of the major challenges that the retail industry has had to face during this process?
I think one of the big ones is inventory management and dealing with supply chain issues and unprecedented and unforecastable demand. So we've seen a level of maturity in doing things differently, in particularly with data over the past 2 years. In the beginning days of the pandemic, we even saw things like some of our larger supermarkets, they had to shut off online and just prioritize getting that inventory into the stores just to deal with the demand and serve what they could. And then a building of the muscle to better understand and take more micro slices of data to do that demand forecasting. And then we saw a lot of the shoppers, the consumers, even switching brands because it wasn't in the store, it wasn't available. So they tried something new and they may have liked that brand and that stuck with them. So we've seen this evolution from the beginning days, a bit of bubble gum and sticky tape to figure it out, even picking up the phone for the retailers to call their suppliers, distributors, or consumer goods companies. In some cases, they couldn't rely on the black box forecasts. So they had to take manual to where we are today with retailers getting better at it. I think one of the things we saw in Australia, because they could see from the rest of the world some of the supply chain challenges, is some of the more advanced retailers who are willing to take on risk ordered more inventory. So they've been able to get through the Christmas season and into now with that excess inventory, and it's worked out pretty good for them. They haven't had to do much discounting. So those who are able to take on a high level of risk and calculate well have done well. We haven't been affected as severely as the rest of the world in the supply chain challenges.
Got it. The other thing that I want to explore is what are some of the opportunities that have come out of this and some of the areas that retailers are currently exploring. So usually when something like this happens in the early days, everyone's pulling their hair out and running around trying to figure out what they're going to do. But then there are certain things, certain positive outcomes that come out of it. What have you seen be some of these changes in the retail sector?
Well, very interesting changes for me are being more vocal around their values alignment, because striking a chord and resonating with your customers and keeping that loyalty, so much more is involved than just the product itself, just the shopping experience, but being transparent about your values and appealing to the emerging generation of Gen Z and Millennial in particular. That's a big one. Also, thinking through very deeply your employees, keeping them safe. How do you skill them up? How do I retain staff? How do I acquire staff? That was a big focus over the past couple of years. And for us with that technology lens, we've been working with customers because sometimes attracting great talent can also be defined by the skills they're providing people, and giving them unique opportunities to advance their career, and in some cases taking away some of the more mundane tasks so that they can do the really cool stuff in retail, being creative, connecting with customers. So that employee piece has been a big one. And then third, I would say this idea of technology enabling more of the strategy. So it became apparent that technology helped address more of the challenges. It offered new unlock for the future in seeing where the customer was going to go next. So not necessarily leading with technology as a strategy, but having technology enable and light up more of that strategy became increasingly important over the last 2 years.
Okay, let's dig a little bit deeper in all three of those, okay? Because I think there are some interesting stuff. Let's talk about values first. What has happened there? I mean, a lot of companies talk about value, right? And you look at it, you're like, what do everybody else talks about that. What have you seen done differently in retail? What have you seen that, it's come out of some of the retailers in Australia that you're like, okay, that is really pushing that value component forward and front of mind?
Well, we know the importance of climate and sustainability, as I said, particularly with Gen Z and millennials. So we've seen retailers like The Iconic have that lens with sustainability. So when you shop, it's very apparent around sustainability driving your purchase, understanding more about the carbon footprint, where these things are even sourced from, and ethical sourcing. So you've got The Iconic kind of leading the way and looking at sustainability lens across all of their business. And we know that that is extreme in the value of the younger generations, and really came out throughout the pandemic. You've got other retailers offering value-driven choices. So Mecca is another great example where when you're shopping for your makeup, you can actually look at animal testing free. So that certainly aligns with a certain cohort that has that value. So we're seeing that delivered more in the customer experience to differentiate that brand and communicate their values to their shoppers and loyal customers. Just a few things, but we're seeing a lot more in terms of recycling and other offerings as part of that brand experience, even for the customer to be able to participate in, because the customer can also co-create in some of those values as well. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more in that space.
Do you think the focus on values was because what you said, that these businesses and retailers saw that some of their customers, because of the changes in COVID, they would switch brand and it's really hard to kind of retain them? Is it more of like a retention play? Or why do you think there's all of a sudden this focus on values?
Well, ideally, it's part of the founding principles and the culture of the company, for one.
Of course. But for some reason, it's become more important after COVID, right?
Yeah. And I think there's also the acknowledgement and the recognition that to retain customers, that they need to share in those values. That when there is values alignment, there's elimination. You've got less discounting, for example. As a consumer, I'd rather pay knowing workers are being treated ethically. They're not using materials that are harmful for the environment. They understand the carbon footprint of the supply chain, that they're sharing their sustainability values. Those are important to me, more so than a discount. That being said, depending on surveys, I think many people will respond. They're willing to pay more, but I think we need to look at actual consumer behavior in some sense, because values driven can also, in certain households, mean that they're always going to take that discount. And I think we saw some of those discussions play out with the job seeker, job keeper, and when that was being taken away, and some of the people, once they lost those benefits, were going to become more price sensitive. So I think that's still an area to watch, but we do know there's a larger cohort willing to pay premium to have that values alignment.
Got it. Let's jump into the second one. What are you seeing retailers doing differently when it comes to kind of talent acquisition and, or basically the employee experience?
Well, one that I love that we're starting to see emerge is taking some of the retail employees that are actually starting on the shop floor, where a lot of retail traditionally comes through, but they may not be in a university degree program at the time, and giving them an opportunity for more of a traineeship to acquire skills to potentially move into a digital team and have a different career, giving them more training to move up within the company, and maybe even offering them some skilling to then go back to university. Or if you're in university and then when you graduate, have that opportunity on the digital team and making those investments in that space. So I think that's a big one. A driver behind that is the fact that in terms of like digital or IT skills here in Australia, we currently have about 650,000 people employed in that industry. It's actually more software engineers now than hairdressers, believe that one or not. But by 2030, we're going to need something in the likes of over 2 million. So massive increase. And traditional university programs and skilled migration, they aren't going to fill that gap. So the employers are now realizing we need to supplement, we need to get very creative in how we're going to embed these digital skills in our staff. And how are we going to differentiate ourselves when we are competing against Facebook, against Salesforce, against Microsoft to hire some of these people? What are we going to do differently?
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, I mean, it's playing from multiple different angles, staff, skill shortage, but also kind of retention of employees and keeping them with the organization. That's a very fascinating move. Let's talk about the last one, which is tech enablement, right? And this is something that people have been talking about for years. And I don't think it's something special to COVID to kind of talking about tech enablement. But what I'm really interested to know is what's different about tech enablement today than it was maybe 3 years ago?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think prior to the pandemic, we would see a focus on innovation. We would see occasionally this thought around test and learn, and you'd see these projects that might be an experiment in the corner of the store, maybe an endless aisle, but it didn't get scaled out to 1,000 stores. I think tech enablement today is truly addressing a challenge. It needs to be scalable. It needs to have a life for test and learn to gain that scale. And that there is an appetite with the leading retailers to make those investments, to learn from what works and doesn't work, and then communicate that throughout their organization as well. And always thinking about this scale. Is this going to improve the customer experience? Is this going to set us up for a platform for success? And less kind of around technology looking for a use case.
Got it. That's a great segue to my next question, where, all right, so these are the areas that I mean, tech is an area that now retailers are investing in to solve challenges versus being innovative and kind of, have a side project going on. What are some of the new areas of growth, some of the new areas that retailers are putting a lot of focus on and putting a lot of investment in that you're seeing in today's market?
Well, number one, I think personalization is just table stakes. So acknowledging the fact that it costs a lot more to acquire a customer than retain and keep one. and that we all have expectations of that brand is going to know me, it's going to make suggestions, it's going to remove friction for me, it's going to deliver things in the way that I want to receive them, it's going to allow me to order in the channel I want and be educated around. So I think everyone's scrambling to kind of keep up on that personalization curve, number one. I think we're also seeing a lot more focus on co-creating with the customer, understanding how they can provide opportunities to learn from the customer and allow the customer to create something unique. That's part of the newer generation and where they want to go, and how technology can be used to do that. And of course, taking costs out of the business. I mean, that's almost table stake as well. You know, we're talking about all of these big ideas, but when we needed to change to have things like click and collect in the stores, we had to think deeply around, well, potentially that's an additional cost. Well, okay, let's look at ways where technology can help bring down those costs. Can we start sourcing from the stores as opposed to a centralized distribution? Do we need to have a blended model to be able to source from a central distribution and stores and bring it? And technology and data plays a very important role there. So I think looking for those opportunities, not only to provide new experiences, but keep them cost effective as well, has been very important, especially since we know these things are going to stay. So they're not going to be able to write them off in the past. They're going to have to find a way to keep them scaling and cost effective moving forward.
Got it. Got it. So personalization, co-creating, and kind of supply chain management. Can you tell me a little bit about the co-creating? I can't really picture what that means. Can you give me a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah, so I think this is more a part of where things are going next, and we're hearing a lot more about the metaverse and what does that really mean, and we're seeing a lot of people scratch their heads. But in some ways, that becomes a vehicle to learn more about the customer, giving them a platform where they can create things of unique value to themselves. So we've heard about this term with NFTs, but that's that ability to like buy something and create something that's unique to me. So some of the early use cases, we may be wondering, well, how does that apply in everyday life? I think the retailers are looking for those platforms where they can co-create and allow the Gen Z and the millennials to create a unique experience, a unique product, have something unique for them. As that is a very important value, and I guess effectively retail for the audience of one and where things are going next.
Okay, that's that. We got to talk more about that, right? Because I mean, this metaverse, NFTs, right, and everything that is built on blockchain is obviously a very hot topic. Not as hot as it was maybe in January, but still a very hot topic. And I know that Salesforce has made some major investments in building a. I think it's called. Are you calling it an NFT platform? Is that if I'm
Yeah,
not
we'll
mistaken?
have a marketplace of more of the solutions that can align with the metaverse. So
Got it.
yeah, it's early days, and right now I would say we're spending more time of kind of educating our customers. Well, what could this mean? Let's unpack what this is really about, so we can consider the use cases moving forward.
So, are retailers seriously looking into metaverse and NFTs at the moment?
I would say many of them are in the learning phases. We have a lot of advanced categories like fashion, for example, where something unique can be created and someone can own it, that are bleeding edge. So Nike, Gucci, or those are where we're seeing more of the early adoption in more of that creative type of community. So I think
Hmm.
we're going to learn from there. I think of other categories that have been held back in a sense with shopping online or digitally. You know, think of food. It's not very much of an immersive experience today. It's very list driven. So imagine if you could immerse yourself in a store and be inspired by what you're seeing around what you're going to cook that night, or be able to visually look more at the aisles. It'd be a completely different shopping experience than a list driven experience that you have today. And we may see, further adoption and willingness to embrace digital with that type of immersive experience in the so-called metaverse.
Very interesting. Very interesting. What are some of the challenges that retailers are having from the emergence of some of the players like that are going direct to consumer. So, I mean, Shopify is a bit of a concern in that space. What are you seeing from that perspective, where a platform like Shopify is really enabling providers to go directly to the market and have their own online store and sell directly versus having their product in a big retailer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say yes and no. That is somewhat of a threat. One of the things happening today is it's become very expensive in the digital space. So if you're an emerging brand and you're looking to go direct to consumer, it can be challenging because the cost of digital is very expensive. So what we tend to see and is more likely are a direct to consumer strategy well thought out that's not degrading your current retail channels. So we see this with some of the larger players like Mars, for example. So they might bring out like a specialized product. Maybe you personalize your lollies of some sort, and you can do that online. Or they have a flagship store and they're going direct to consumer. But in some sense, they're learning more too about the change in consumer behavior. They're having more of a direct connection so that they can help their retail partners out. So that's more symbiotic. But certainly those lines are blurring between what is a retailer, what is a consumer goods company. But the consumer goods companies are wanting to understand more about the consumer, and they're still doing a lot of that marketing. So I think they're looking for activations when they can go more direct. We're even seeing some of these consumer goods companies, especially who play more in that hospitality space. So if you think of pubs and clubs and suppliers of the alcohol in there, and they may have fridges in there, wanting to provide more of a platform. So potentially maybe even that refrigerator in the pub could be an advertising screen. They could look at what is being housed in there. They could provide more e-commerce capabilities for a small pub that can't set up their own. Maybe click and collect as a service. So we're seeing some interesting things in that space as well. And what they're really aiming to do, again, get more data about that consumer behavior, not only for that model and that shared platform they may be building out, but also to better help their retail partners as well. So ideally, it's not so much competing, but becomes more symbiotic. I think it is becoming more difficult for kind of those startup direct to consumers to get started on their own that we were seeing, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago in the US, where we're seeing a lot of that. And then that space became crowded. So we are seeing the rise of more marketplaces, even with physical store activations and pop-ups that can aggregate these new direct-to-consumer brands, and they can acquire customers and do a bit more test and learn, and then decide if they want to pursue more of a partnership with retailers or they can go at it on their own. And with cookies being deprecated in the future, it's going to become even more difficult to acquire those customers and more expensive. So it's an interesting time right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, last question that I want to ask is, some of the listeners that are listening to our podcast would be targeting the retail sector, would want to work with retail sector, right? Or they want to sell something to the retail sector. What is your advice to companies out there who are looking at working with the retail sector specifically?
And that could be across a broad spectrum of services and offerings, Shahin.
I know it's a broad vertical, and it might be a bit hard to generalize, but is there something that you can think of that, if I'm a company that I'm trying to target the retail sector, or is there any advice that you have for a company that is targeting this sector?
Sure, I would think about where some of their pain points are today. We've talked in this interview quite a bit about the challenge with skills and access to talent. So can you help supplement? Can you help bring some of those skills in through what you're bringing to their business? Because they may not be able to hire that in-house. Maybe they can work with some of the service providers that might be listening here to help augment and even supplement or fill a gap for skills they're having a hard time getting within the organization. Particularly, we know with e-commerce and digital, that's a challenging space to hire in talent. So that would be one area. Anyone who's kind of launching and bringing a new product to market, thinking about if that's going to be expensive. The retailers are always looking for fresh products. We're seeing a lot of retailers move into marketplaces, so they don't have to hold the inventory and they may be more willing to trial a new product, bring something fresh because they're well aware of this brand switching that's gone on and they're looking for fresher offerings, particularly that align with their values. So if your product has a great sustainability tag or represents some of the new, let's say, health and wellness habits that are emerging, that could be this could be great timing for you. So those would be some of the areas I would look at, and then expertise to help them grow into new white space. So that could be new business models. Maybe they want to add services into their product range, or maybe they want to look at new markets outside of Australia. For some reason lately, I'm hearing a lot more about entry into the US market, which is kind of interesting. I mean, you've got a big supply chain to tackle there. Certainly, China is always a big one. And I'm seeing some interesting things with growth outside of Australia and Europe, but looking at markets like Ireland or smaller countries too to start as a bit of a test and learn before you go all in the EU or all you in the UK. So, can you provide some unique viewpoints or partnerships in terms of their growth strategy?
Got it. Got it. Those are awesome, awesome points. Marcella, before we wrap up, I have a couple of rapid fire questions I want to ask you, right? But before we get to that, is there anything that we should touch on that maybe I didn't ask or you think it's important to talk about when it comes to retail, their challenges, the opportunities, the new areas of growth and so on and so forth that maybe I haven't touched on?
Well, Shane, I would actually be interested to know in how much time do you think that the retailers have to take a look at what's happening outside of their own environment and if that's changing now and what you're hearing, because I feel like we've had a breather. We've gotten through some very challenging times in acceleration. Maybe there is a breathing point and a curiosity to understand what's happening outside of Australia, what's happening in the rest of the world, and maybe more time to bring in ideas and less of this constant pace of delivering new projects, getting the inventory in the store. That's what I'm seeing a bit. I'm seeing a lot of interest in going to events and meeting other retailers. I'm curious if you're seeing the same right now.
I definitely, most definitely, I see that quite a lot as well, where I feel like retailers are a little bit worried about what is happening in some of the other countries, specifically if there are entries or organizations that are coming into Australia of what that could potentially look like. What is that? What are they doing in their own turf? So if it's, I think the easiest example of this would be Amazon. If like Amazon is coming over here, what is Amazon like in the US, and what is that the kingdom look like, which is kind of like that, right? And I see quite a lot of that, quite a lot of curiosity, and sometimes a lot of amazement after the eyes are opened and people realize how broad certain things are, or how specific certain things are, and how different it is in some of the other geographies. Is that something you're seeing as well, or is it an isolated observation from my end?
Yeah, I think because we've all been grounded here for 2 years, now there's this curiosity to go and see what innovation might be coming from another country that's had to address challenges. Maybe they take a different approach. What can we bring back and share with our teams here? Sorry. The other thing is inflation. It's not anything we've had to deal with our lifetime. And we're seeing some levels in the US of the 1970s. I think early on, generally in January, February, when we started to see that in Australia, a little bit of inflation was good because retailers haven't been able to increase prices for quite some time. But I do sense a bit of uncertainty of what does this mean? This is getting very real right now. And do we pass on these costs to our consumers? What's going to be their appetite and willingness to pay these costs?
I think that's a massive component, and I think that goes in on a more broader scale of things and gets a bit geopolitical and economical, talking about the inflation. But I would imagine retail would be the number one, at least one of the main areas that is going to be looking at this very closely of what inflation is going to mean for them. I mean, I definitely don't want to pretend like I have the answer for it. But I know there's a lot of conversations around that and a lot of concerns for what this means for a lot of us. Yeah, you're right. Numbers of and I think the other question is Australia going to follow some of the numbers that are coming out of the US? Because 8 point something percent in the US is those are crazy numbers, and there are debates that obviously there might be some misalignment in terms of how that's calculated. So that just opens up a door for a completely different podcast and definitely another episode of Growth Colony. But Marcella, before we wrap up, I want to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions, okay? And we'll smash through them really quick, and we'll go from there. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay, Marcella, give me one resource. This could be a book, a blog, a podcast, whatever it is, a talk that has fundamentally changed the way you work or you live or your outlook to the world.
Well, I think a big one for me, and I had the opportunity to meet him in person, is Scott Galloway. And I love the Pivot podcasts. Of course, I look at things from technology, and I like to understand more of where's the disruption happening and have some good controversial discussions, also political in a way, I guess. So I think Scott does a good job of pushing the envelope, provocative views, thinking across industry. But most of the themes he does talk about truly apply to retail and even managing your career and thinking about what you want to be keeping on top of what's coming next. So he's a big one for me, and one I highly recommend to follow in terms of thought leaders. He would be a big one.
He is, and definitely with his new CNN Plus gig, he's a lot more people are gonna hear about him than previously. But he is definitely a quite a character, and definitely very interesting to listen to. Question number 2: if you were gonna give anyone in the retail sector, right, and they're thinking about what direction they should go or what they should do, what would be one advice that you would give to people in the retail sector?
Well, even practical advice, I'll go back to a book I just recently read, which I thought was a great one, The Innovation Stack, the founder's Stripe, which I think is now evolved into Block. I love the point of this book because you can't just move into a market and think about one innovation. It's everything behind it and the 100 other things that are going to change as a result of this one change. So I was truly inspired by that, and just the authentic nature with founding Stripe of what the founder, what he really wanted to achieve, and helping small business that basically couldn't afford to have credit card capabilities because they were so small. So it's that genuine passion, but that innovation stack concept I love, because so often we see retailers also stating we're technology companies, we want to learn about innovation. I think that really gets into the heart of thinking across. It's not just one thing, it's the stack behind it, it's the culture, it's a mindset. So great read for everyone.
Got it. Okay. Question number 3, and you've kind of answered this. I'm just going to ask it if there's anything else. Who are some of the influencers that you follow?
Scott Galloway, we said.
Yes, we talked about. Is there anybody else?
I try to follow Doug Stevens now and then. He's kind of this retail prophet and thought leader. I always try to read, the Amazon letter for shareholders, look at what's going on there. Andy Jassy just published his first one. So that's a great one to follow. You mentioned them too, kind of understand where things are going next by reading what Amazon's saying or what they're not saying. Look at what patents they're putting into market. For me, I like to look at CB Insights too, because I like to look at what's happening in the startup world in the industry I focus on, retail, but also other industries, because There could be innovative ideas, let's say, happening in banking that we might think about in retail. So CB Insights does a good job of kind of giving the latest download on that. Fast Company, another great one. And just to even look at what's happening in Australia, Inside Retail and AFR are great. But I do like to mix it up with what's happening internationally. And I'm a big follower of Coresight Research. Deborah Winswig, founder, she's a friend of mine. So I love to see what's happening in China and who's adopting these trends in the rest of the world. So Coresight does a great job at that as well.
I love it. I love it. That's a pretty comprehensive list. And there are definitely some publications in there that I love. Love CB Insight. I mean, they do an amazing job. Thank you so much for that list. Last question that I have is, what's something that excites you about retail today?
I love retail because it's always changing, and it's a great industry if you are curious and you want to think ahead of where the customer is going. We can rest assured that it's never going to remain stagnant, and it touches our lives every day. So I'm sure those of us in the industry know that everyone's got an opinion because we're all shoppers and we're all consumers. So I think it's one of the most exciting ones out there, and that we can rest assured that change is going to be a constant theme for us.
I love it. Marcella, this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for all these insights that you shared with me and the audience.
Well, thank you. And I'll be looking forward to maybe coming back and sharing some of how Australia is leading the way. I do think we have some incredible innovation that's happened in our nation, especially since, again, we haven't been able to leave in 2.5 years. In the meanwhile, I think there's been some exciting things that have happened here that I'm personally sharing with the rest of the world, particularly in how we work with our suppliers as retailers and how we've had to rise to the occasion given the lack of our government's willingness to kind of put mandates in place around sustainability. So I think our retailers have done a great job in serving shareholders and shoppers on that front in particular.
Yeah. Well, absolutely looking forward to it. That's going to be another hot topic to discuss. But again, thank you so much for today, and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you.
This episode of Growth Colony was produced by Alexander Hipwell. It was edited by Dave Samito, with additional editing and music arrangement also by Alexander Hipwell. Special thanks to Tina Wabe and Rod Hoda. We couldn't make this show without you. The show is hosted by Shahin Hoda. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And maybe even share the pod with a friend if you loved it that much. Thanks again for all the support, and looking forward to seeing you again in the next one.